On July 2, 1937, at 8:43 a.m. Howland Island time, the world heard what would become the most famous last transmission in aviation history. Amelia Earhart's voice crackled through the radio with unmistakable clarity. "We are on line 157, 337. We are running north and south." Then, silence. Complete, absolute, inexplicable silence. For the next 88 years, those 18 words would haunt historians, aviation experts, and armchair detectives worldwide. A woman who had conquered both the Atlantic Ocean and the hearts of millions had simply vanished over the Pacific. No wreckage, no bodies, no definitive answers. Just questions. Endless, tantalizing questions that refused to be answered. The search that followed was one of the largest and most expensive in the history of the United States Navy. Nearly 4,000 military personnel, 66 aircraft, multiple ships including the aircraft carrier USS Lexington, and a staggering $4 million equivalent to roughly $75 million today, were deployed to find any trace of Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan. The search covered 250,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean, an area roughly the size of Texas. They found nothing. Yet, in the 10 days following her disappearance, the Coast Guard received 121 radio signals on her frequency. 57 of them were believed to have potentially come from her aircraft. Most were transmitted at night, when a crashed airplane supposedly sinking into the depths of the ocean would be incapable of transmitting at all. For nearly 9 decades, the world has been captivated by the mystery of what happened to Amelia Earhart. But before we explore the theories, the evidence, and the contradictions, we must first understand who she was. Not the legend, not the icon, but the woman, the determined girl from Kansas who built her own roller coaster, worked 5 jobs simultaneously, and refused to let anyone tell her what a woman couldn't do. Amelia Mary Earhart was born on July 24, 1897, in Atchison, Kansas. Her life from birth was marked by instability, defiance of societal norms, and an unquenchable desire for adventure. Her father, Samuel Edwin Earhart, was a lawyer who struggled with alcoholism and often lost his job. Her mother, Amelia Otis Amy Earhart, was a progressive woman far ahead of her time. She supported women's suffrage, wore bloomers instead of skirts, and most importantly, she encouraged her daughters to be independent and bold. The family moved frequently. Des Moines, Omaha, St. Paul, Los Angeles. Amelia's childhood was a carousel of new schools, new towns, and new challenges. With no stable home and a father whose drinking problem made home an unpredictable place, young Amelia learned early that she could only truly rely on herself. While other girls played with dolls and prepared themselves for domestic life, Amelia climbed trees, hunted rats with a .22 rifle, and collected insects in jars. Her mother, rather than scolding her for these unladylike behaviors, supported her interests. In a time when girls were expected to be delicate, quiet, and obedient, Amelia was wild, loud, and defiant. In 1904, 7-year-old Amelia visited the St. Louis World's Fair. She saw the roller coaster, a thrilling modern marvel that embodied everything about freedom and flight. She was mesmerized. When she returned home to Kansas, she made a decision. She would build her own roller coaster. Working with her younger sister Muriel, whom she called Pidge, Amelia gathered materials. They found wooden planks, an old wooden box, and a bucket of lard, animal fat used for lubrication. They built their contraption on the roof of a tool shed, creating a steep slide that angled downward at a dangerous pitch. When Amelia climbed into the box and her sister pushed her off, she experienced something that would define her entire life. She flew. For a brief, glorious moment, her homemade machine launched her into the air. She soared perhaps 6 to 8 feet through the air before crashing into a bush below. When she emerged from the vegetation, her dress torn and her body bruised, Amelia had only one thing to say. "Pidge, that's what flying must feel like." Later, in her diary, she reflected on that moment. "This was the most wonderful sensation in my life." She was 7 years old. She already knew what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. When she was 12 years old, she and her uncle Carl Udall attempted to build a flying machine. It was constructed from cardboard boxes, wood, and fabric. They called it the Aspidistra. They tried to launch it from the roof of her house. The experiment failed spectacularly. The contraption lasted less than a second in the air before it crashed and fell apart. Most children would have been discouraged. Amelia simply decided that she needed to learn more about how to build real airplanes. Her father's problems created a psychologically complex young woman. She witnessed her mother's suffering in a marriage to an alcoholic man who couldn't control his impulses or keep his job. This made Amelia deeply skeptical of marriage. She would later tell friends that she had no desire to marry, that she valued her independence above all else, and that she would never allow a relationship to dictate her choices. Yet, despite her difficult family circumstances, Amelia had something most children don't: a mother who believed in her. Her mother didn't tell her that flying was impossible because she was a girl. She didn't tell her that her dreams were unrealistic or foolish. Instead, she gave her the tools to dream bigger than any girl was supposed to dream in the 1890s and early 1900s. On December 28, 1920, Amelia Earhart, now 23 years old, was in Long Beach, California. She and a friend walked past an airfield and watched planes taking off and landing. Flying was still a novelty in 1920. Most people had never seen a real airplane. It was dangerous, unreliable, and extraordinarily rare. A legendary pilot named Frank Hawks noticed the young woman's interest. Hawks was a famous aviator, a World War I flying ace, and one of the most skilled pilots in the world. For reasons that remain unclear, he offered Amelia an impromptu flight. She accepted without hesitation. The airplane was a red Curtiss Pusher biplane. As she climbed into the passenger seat, Amelia felt the vibration of the engine, heard the deafening roar of the propeller, and experienced the first serious fear of her life. But when the wheels left the ground, when she was actually flying, truly flying, something shifted inside her. According to her own account, she knew within 300 feet of altitude that this was what she would do for the rest of her life. The fear vanished, replaced by absolute certainty. The flight lasted only about 10 minutes. When they landed and she climbed out of the cockpit, her hair was disheveled from the wind. Her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were wide with wonder. She asked Frank Hawks the only question that mattered: "How can I learn to fly?" In 1920, flying lessons cost $1 per hour of flight time. Amelia Earhart did not come from a wealthy family. Her father's problems meant that she couldn't ask him for money. She would have to earn every penny herself. What followed was one of the most remarkable displays of determination and sacrifice in modern history. Between 1921 and 1923, Amelia worked 5 jobs simultaneously. Her primary employment was as a filing clerk at the Los Angeles Telephone Company, earning 50 cents per hour for a full day's work. Every evening, after leaving the office, she would process photographic film for a local photographer. On weekends, she worked as a truck driver, one of the first women to do this job in Los Angeles. Her truck would often break down, and she would repair it herself, covered in grease and oil. She also worked night shifts at an automobile factory, assembling cars in hot, dangerous conditions. And whenever she could find the time, she taught English to foreign students, working late into the evening. Her daily schedule was punishing. Wake at 5:30 a.m., work 8 hours at the telephone company, attend flight lessons if she had saved enough money, then head to her evening job. Often she wouldn't return home until after midnight. This schedule was repeated nearly every single day, 7 days a week, without vacation or rest days. The financial calculation was brutal. Flying lessons cost approximately $1 per hour. She needed at least 50 hours of instruction to earn her pilot's license. A used airplane cost $1,000 or more. In 1920s money, this was an astronomical sum, equivalent to roughly $75,000 in today's currency. Yet, through absolute dedication, refusing to spend money on anything except her flying education, Amelia managed to save enough. Her monthly income from all 5 jobs was approximately $460. Her living expenses were minimal, about $80 to $110 per month. She put virtually every remaining dollar toward her flying lessons and, eventually, toward buying her first airplane. What drove her? Not a desire for fame, not a dream of becoming a celebrity. She wanted to fly. That simple, pure desire was enough to sustain her through years of exhausting work, constant fatigue, and the knowledge that everyone around her thought she was crazy. As she would later write, "I was willing to work twice as hard, if it meant I could fly." By 1921, Amelia had saved enough money to purchase her first airplane. She bought a used Kinner Airster L-5 biplane. It was old, temperamental, and frequently broke down, but it was hers. She painted it bright yellow, a color that would become her signature. She named it the Canary. The Canary was not a reliable aircraft by any measure. The engine often stalled in flight. The fuel tank leaked, dripping gasoline on Amelia's face during flights. The landing gear was fragile and broke easily. The wooden wings, covered in fabric, would vibrate alarmingly during climbs. The maximum altitude it could reach was only 7,000 feet, and its maximum speed was barely 60 miles per hour. But it was an airplane, and it was hers. Amelia flew the Canary everywhere, participating in air shows and attempting various aviation challenges. Neighbors would hear it take off with a characteristic sputtering sound and joke about that crazy girl in the yellow plane. But Amelia didn't care what anyone thought. She was flying. On October 22, 1922, Amelia attempted an altitude record. She climbed higher and higher in the Canary, pushing both the airplane and herself to their limits. She reached 14,000 feet, a new women's world record for altitude. Her name appeared in the Los Angeles Times for the first time. Miss Earhart sets woman's record. From that moment forward, Amelia Earhart was no longer just another aviation enthusiast. She was becoming a symbol of what women could achieve. By 1928, Amelia had established herself as one of the most accomplished female pilots in the world. She had set multiple records, flown across the Atlantic as a passenger, which infuriated her. She was determined to fly the Atlantic as a pilot and earned the respect of aviation professionals worldwide. She had also met George Palmer Putnam, a prominent publisher and aviation promoter who would change her life in ways both wonderful and complicated. Putnam was charismatic, ambitious, and genuinely interested in promoting aviation. He had been previously married to Dorothy Binney, a Crayola heiress, and had divorced. He was about 10 years older than Amelia, divorced, and considered quite the catch in 1930s society. He fell in love with Amelia Earhart and began proposing to her. Not once, but repeatedly. According to Amelia's own account, George proposed to her 6 different times over a period of months. Each time, she said no. Amelia was terrified of marriage. She had seen her own parents' marriage destroyed by her father's drinking and irresponsibility. She had watched her mother suffer through years of unhappiness, stuck in a relationship that gave her no freedom or independence. Amelia was determined that if, and that was a significant if, she ever married, it would be on completely different terms. Finally, in February 1931, Amelia agreed to marry George Putnam, but she had conditions. A few hours before the wedding ceremony, Amelia gave George a letter. It was not a love letter. It was not a sweet affirmation of her feelings for him. Instead, it was a manifesto of independence, a negotiation of terms, and perhaps the most brutally honest letter ever given to a groom before his wedding. The letter read, in part, "Dear George, I want you to know me as I am before you take this step of marrying me. I cannot promise you much. You must know my reluctance to marry, my feeling that I shatter thereby chances in work which means so much to me. I do not think I should hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you similarly. If we can be honest, I think the chance of happiness is better. Isn't it possible for us to not lose our sense of humor, to stay awake, to grow, to change, to feel fresh always? I want to keep my name. I want to do the flying I do. I may have to keep some place where I can go to be myself now and then, for I cannot guarantee to endure at all times the confinements of even an attractive cage. I must exact a cruel promise, and that is, you will let me go in a year if we find no happiness together. I will try to do my best in every way, and give you that part of me you know and seem to want. Your Amelia." This letter was revolutionary for 1931. In an era when wives were expected to be submissive, obedient, and completely dependent on their husbands, Amelia was refusing to promise fidelity in either direction. She was demanding the right to keep her own name, insisting on maintaining her career, and requiring personal space and independence. She was setting a 1-year trial period for the marriage and explicitly refusing to be confined by traditional marriage bonds. What happened next was equally remarkable. George Putnam read the letter, understood exactly what Amelia was telling him, and after some thought, agreed to her terms. He married her anyway. And despite her many fears, despite her certainty that marriage would destroy her career and her independence, the marriage lasted. Not perfectly, not without complications, but it lasted until her death in 1937. George became her most ardent supporter, her business manager, her promoter, and someone who seemed to genuinely understand and respect her need for freedom. Between 1930 and 1935, Amelia Earhart established herself as the greatest female aviator in history. In just 5 years, she set 7 major world records that would cement her legacy forever. In April 1931, she flew an autogiro to an altitude of 18,415 feet, setting a women's world record. During the flight, she nearly lost consciousness from oxygen deprivation and had to be hospitalized afterward with cerebral edema. For the rest of her life, she would occasionally complain of headaches, likely residual effects from this dangerous flight. In January 1935, she completed the first-ever solo flight from Hawaii to California, a distance of 2,408 miles over open ocean. The flight took nearly 20 hours without a single stop. She encountered severe weather halfway through, flying through thunderstorms and nearly losing her bearings. When she finally landed in California, She was so weak from exhaustion and stress that she could barely climb out of the cockpit. In August 1935, she completed another record, a solo flight from Los Angeles to Mexico City to Newark. This demonstrated that women could fly long-distance routes across multiple countries, breaking down yet another barrier. She set multiple records for speed and distance in various aircraft categories and flew in air races, winning competitions against male pilots. She became the first woman to fly certain routes, the first woman to achieve certain altitudes, and the first woman to demonstrate that commercial aviation wasn't exclusively a male domain. Each of these records represented not just a personal achievement, but a statement. Amelia Earhart was proving that women were capable of exactly the same feats as men. There was no inherent reason why women couldn't fly across oceans, set altitude records, or navigate the world's most challenging routes. She said it best, "I set records not for the sake of records, but to advance aviation and show what women can do." In 1929, Amelia realized something that troubled her. Despite all her achievements, despite her record-breaking flights, there were still only about 117 female pilots with licenses in the entire United States. These women had no organized support system. They had no network. They had no way to help each other advance their careers or push back against the prejudice they faced. Amelia decided to create one. She wrote letters to all 117 licensed female pilots in America, inviting them to form an organization. On November 2, 1929, the organization was officially founded. It was called the 99s, named after the 99 women who were active founding members. Amelia served as the organization's first president from 1931 to 1933. She wrote the organization's constitution, set its standards, and established its mission to support female pilots, advance aviation, and challenge the prejudice that existed against women in aviation. The organization was radical for its time. It wasn't a charity or a social club. It was a professional organization run by women, for women, with the explicit purpose of advancing women's careers in aviation. In 2024, nearly 95 years after its founding, the 99s still exists. It now has 153 chapters across the world, with members in 27 countries. The organization awards millions of dollars in scholarships to young female pilots every year. It holds annual conferences, publishes journals, and continues Amelia's mission of supporting and advancing women in aviation. When someone asks what Amelia Earhart's greatest legacy is, many people think of her disappearance. But perhaps her true legacy is the 99s, an organization that has helped tens of thousands of women become pilots, engineers, and aviation professionals. By 1937, at age 39, Amelia had achieved virtually everything any pilot could dream of. She held records. She had earned international fame. She had proven that women could do anything men could do. But there was one achievement that still eluded her: flying around the world. Purdue University, interested in supporting aviation advancement, offered to finance the flight. The cost was approximately $80,000, equivalent to roughly $1.2 million in 2024 dollars. This would be the most ambitious aviation project Amelia had ever attempted. She purchased a Lockheed Model 10 Electra, a twin-engine aircraft specifically modified for this journey. The plane had a registration number, NR16020. It was equipped to carry far more fuel than any civilian aircraft of the era: 1,151 gallons of gasoline distributed across 10 fuel tanks throughout the wings and fuselage. The planned route would take her from Miami, Florida, westward around the world at the equator. The total distance would be approximately 29,000 miles, The flight would take nearly a month. Her navigator was Fred Noonan, widely considered the finest long-distance navigator in the world. Noonan had been a sea captain in the Merchant Marine. During World War I, he had survived 3 ship sinkings when German submarines torpedoed the vessels he was serving on. He had later become a pioneering navigator for Pan American Airways, mapping out some of the first long-distance air routes across the Pacific Ocean. Noonan was respected, experienced, and seemingly the ideal choice for this challenging flight. There was only one problem. He had a history of navigation errors on emergency landings. The journey began on June 1, 1937. The plan was to fly eastward from Miami, stopping at various points around the world, eventually reaching Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean, where they would refuel and continue toward Oakland, California, to complete the round-the-world flight. The first leg of the journey proceeded normally, but on March 17, 1937, before the Pacific crossing that would make them famous, disaster nearly struck. On the takeoff from Wheeler Field in Hawaii, the aircraft's landing gear failed. The plane became too heavy with fuel to maintain altitude if they tried to take off with the damaged gear. Amelia managed to avoid a catastrophic crash, but the aircraft suffered significant damage. The landing gear, the fuselage, and the wings all sustained damage that required major repairs. The entire flight had to be delayed by over a month while the aircraft was repaired. The planned route also had to be recalculated. Instead of flying westward around the world, they would now fly eastward from Miami, with a crucial leg taking them from Lae, New Guinea, to Howland Island in the Central Pacific, one of the longest and most dangerous stretches of the journey. Howland Island is one of the smallest islands in the world. It measures approximately 1.6 miles long and 0.8 miles wide, about the size of 2 football fields. It sits in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Finding it from the air would require precision navigation that was, in 1937, at the very edge of what was possible. On July 1, 1937, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan took off from Lae, New Guinea, at approximately 6 o'clock a.m. local time. Their destination was Howland Island, approximately 2,556 miles away. The flight was expected to take approximately 20 to 21 hours. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was positioned near Howland Island to provide radio navigation assistance and to be ready for rescue operations if needed. The ship was equipped with direction-finding equipment that could, theoretically, help locate the aircraft's radio transmissions. Amelia and Fred were equipped with a radio transmitter operating on 3105 kilocycles. They could transmit on this frequency and on 500 kilocycles for emergency situations. The Itasca would attempt to provide a bearing to help them locate the island. But from the very beginning, there were problems. At 6:14 a.m. Howland Island time on July 2nd, Amelia transmitted, "On line north and south, estimated position 200 miles out." She reported that she was on the coordinate line that should take them directly to Howland Island, approximately 200 miles away. The next transmissions were sporadic. By 7:42 a.m., Amelia's situation had become critical. She transmitted, "We must be on you, but we cannot see you. Fuel is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet." The key phrase was, "Fuel is running low." The aircraft had been in the air for over 20 hours. According to the flight plan, they should have had adequate fuel. But either the fuel consumption had been higher than expected, or there had been a miscalculation. Something was wrong. At 7:50 a.m., operators on the Itasca asked, "How much gas have you left?" Amelia did not directly answer that question. Instead, at 7:58 a.m., she transmitted, "We must be on you, or very close." By 8 o'clock a.m., Amelia reported, "We are running north and south." This phrase is crucial to understanding what happened next. She was flying along a north-south line, presumably trying to find Howland Island by flying along the coordinate line that should pass through it. Then, at 8:43 a.m., came the final transmission. The radio signal was strong and clear. Amelia's voice was professional, calm, and steady. No panic, no desperation, just facts. We are on line 157-337. We are running north and south. After that transmission, there was nothing. No emergency signals. No distress calls. No indication of an engine failure or a crash. Simply silence. The Itasca waited. The operators called repeatedly, trying to make radio contact. They attempted direction-finding procedures to locate the aircraft's position. They searched the sky and the ocean, but there was nothing. By 8:45 a.m., it was clear that something catastrophic had happened. The U.S. Navy and the U.S. Coast Guard immediately initiated a massive search and rescue operation. The scope of this operation would become one of the largest and most expensive in the history of American military aviation. Within hours, military vessels and aircraft from the Pacific Fleet were mobilized. The aircraft carrier, USS Lexington, one of the most powerful warships in the world, was diverted to the search area. The Lexington carried 63 combat aircraft. A battleship, the USS Colorado, was also dispatched. 3 modern destroyers, multiple patrol vessels, and the Coast Guard cutter Itasca formed the core of the search force. In total, approximately 4,000 military personnel participated in the search. 66 aircraft were deployed. The search area covered 250,000 square miles, an area roughly equivalent to the size of Texas. The official search lasted 14 to 17 days. During this entire period, not a single piece of evidence was found. No wreckage, no debris, no oil slick, no bodies, no life raft, no equipment. The search was called off on July 18, 1937, with Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan officially declared missing and presumed dead. The cost of the operation was approximately $4 million, an astronomical sum in 1937, equivalent to roughly 60 to 75 million in modern currency. For perspective, the average house in 1937 cost $3,000 to $5,000. The entire search operation cost enough to build an entire neighborhood of homes, but it yielded nothing. Yet, something extraordinary happened in the 10 days following Amelia's final transmission. On the frequency she had been using, 3,105 kilocycles, the Itasca and other ships and radio operators received 121 radio signals. Many of these signals were faint and difficult to interpret, but approximately 57 of them were believed to potentially have come from Earhart's aircraft. The signals included phrases like, "waiting for bearing," "150 on line," and "Itasca, we are standing by." Most remarkably, the vast majority of these signals were transmitted during nighttime hours. Hours when a crashed airplane supposedly sinking into the ocean's depths would be completely incapable of transmitting radio signals. The signals gradually weakened over the 10-day period, as if the transmitter's batteries were slowly dying. What did these signals mean? Were they genuine transmissions from Amelia's aircraft? Or were they interference, stray signals from other sources, or imagination? To this day, the answer remains unclear. The most widely accepted explanation, endorsed by the U.S. government, the Smithsonian Institution, and most mainstream historians, is straightforward. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan ran out of fuel, crashed into the Pacific Ocean, and sank. The evidence supporting this theory is compelling. Amelia herself reported that fuel was running low. The calculations of fuel consumption versus available fuel are extremely tight. There was little margin for error. If winds were stronger than expected, if the aircraft used fuel more quickly than calculated, or if there had been any navigation error, the fuel supply would have been exhausted. Moreover, if the aircraft crashed into the open ocean in a deep part of the Pacific, wreckage would sink to tremendous depths. In some areas, the Pacific is over 16,000 feet deep, and would be virtually impossible to find without specialized deep-sea exploration equipment, technology that didn't exist in 1937. The official conclusion of the U.S. Navy, stated in multiple reports, was that the aircraft ran out of fuel and sank, likely somewhere between Howland Island and the Gilbert Islands. However, this theory has a significant problem: the 121 radio signals. If the aircraft crashed into the ocean, how could it transmit radio signals for 10 days? The radio equipment would be underwater. The batteries would be waterlogged. The transmitter would be non-functional. Furthermore, the signals were mainly received at night, when reception would be better due to atmospheric conditions, and when someone on an island rather than in a sinking aircraft would be more likely to attempt to transmit. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, TGAR, an organization dedicated to aviation archaeology, has spent over 23 years investigating an alternative theory that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan did not crash into the ocean. Instead, they made an emergency landing on Nikumaroro Island, also known as Gardner Island, located in the Phoenix Islands, approximately 350 miles southwest of Howland Island. The radio signals received after Amelia's disappearance include several that appear to have come from a specific geographic location. 4 separate bearing lines crossed in the vicinity of the Phoenix Islands, precisely where Nikumaroro Island is located. The signals were primarily transmitted at night, which would make sense if the transmitter was operating on a beach accessible only when the tide was out at night. Over the decades, researchers have found various artifacts on Nikumaroro Island that might have belonged to Amelia or Fred. A woman's shoe with size and construction potentially matching Amelia's, a compact mirror. Amelia was known to care about her appearance. A bottle of freckle cream, a dermatological product from the 1930s that Amelia used, and various fragments of aluminum and other metals potentially from an aircraft. In 1940, 3 years after Amelia's disappearance, human skeletal remains were discovered on Nikumaroro Island. The bones were documented, measured, and photographed, but were subsequently lost. In 2018, forensic anthropologist Richard Jantz conducted an analysis of the photographs of these skeletal remains. He concluded that the measurements of the bones matched Amelia Earhart's dimensions with 99% probability. He stated, "It is more likely than not that the Nikumaroro bones belong to Amelia Earhart." If Amelia had been flying on a 157-degree heading, as she mentioned in her last transmission, she would have flown directly toward Nikumaroro Island rather than toward Howland Island. It's possible that she and Fred had miscalculated their position, or that they deliberately altered course when they couldn't locate the tiny Howland Island. The advantage of Nikumaroro as a landing site is that it's an actual island, a place where the aircraft could have landed, and where survivors could have lasted for several days or even weeks before running out of water and food. However, this theory also has significant problems. If the aircraft landed on Nikumaroro, where is it? Decades of searching have found no major aircraft wreckage on the island. A large Lockheed Electra would have left substantial remains, even after decades of exposure to weather. No definitive DNA analysis of the 1940 skeletal remains has ever been conducted. The bones were lost, so any modern analysis is impossible. The theory rests on bone measurements from 1940, measurements that, while suggestive, are not definitive proof. Nikumaroro Island is essentially barren. It has limited fresh water, limited vegetation, and was completely uninhabited in 1937. Would Amelia and Fred have survived more than a few days on the island? The radio signals suggest they survived for at least 10 days, but could they have lasted longer? A more controversial theory suggests that Amelia and Fred's aircraft wandered into Japanese-controlled territory, possibly near the Marshall Islands. They were allegedly captured by Japanese military forces, transported to Saipan Island, and eventually executed or imprisoned. This theory was popularized by a 2017 History Channel documentary titled Amelia Earhart, The Lost Evidence, which presented what was claimed to be photographic evidence from the U.S. National Archives supposedly showing Amelia and Fred in Japanese custody. However, this theory has a fatal flaw. The photograph was dated 1935, 2 years before Amelia's disappearance. This fundamental error destroyed the credibility of what had been presented as the primary evidence for the theory. Additionally, the Marshall Islands were several hundred miles north of Amelia's intended flight path. There would be no logical reason for her to deviate so dramatically from her course unless her navigation was catastrophically wrong. While Fred Noonan was an excellent navigator, he was not infallible, and it seems unlikely that he would have made an error of several hundred miles. Perhaps the most sensational theory is that Amelia Earhart survived her disappearance and lived the rest of her life under an assumed identity. The most famous version of this theory involves a woman named Irene Craigmile Bolam, who lived in New Jersey and died in 1982. The theory suggests that Amelia faked her death, went into hiding, changed her name to Irene Bolam, and lived a normal life as a banker in New Jersey for the next 45 years. This theory is based primarily on a 1970 book titled Amelia Earhart Lives by Joe Clace, which presented circumstantial evidence that Bolam and Earhart were the same person. However, this theory has been thoroughly discredited. When photographs of Bolam and Earhart are compared, their facial features are significantly different. Forensic experts in facial recognition have concluded that they are not the same person. Irene Bolam's life is completely documented. She has a birth certificate dated 1903, making her 6 years older than Earhart. She has a marriage certificate. She has a pilot's license dated 1937, the same year Earhart disappeared. But it was Bolam's license, not Earhart's. Her childhood, her family history, and her career all have documented evidence supporting that she was a real, independent person, not Amelia Earhart in disguise. Bolam herself sued the publisher of Amelia Earhart Lives, demanding $1.5 million in damages. The court ruled in her favor, confirming that the theory was false and defamatory. Amelia Earhart was famous around the world. She was a public figure who thrived on recognition and achievement. It would have been psychologically impossible for her to voluntarily live in obscurity for 45 years, unable to acknowledge her accomplishments or her identity. The idea contradicts everything we know about her personality and her values. Amidst all the theories and investigations, aviation historians and engineers have uncovered a technical problem that may have been a significant factor in the disaster: a radio frequency incompatibility that prevented Amelia from receiving navigation signals from the Itasca. Amelia's aircraft was equipped with direction-finding equipment that could receive radio signals and determine the direction from which they came. This equipment could theoretically be used to locate the Howland Island radio beacon and guide the aircraft to the island. However, there was a critical problem. Amelia's DF equipment could effectively receive signals at frequencies up to approximately 500 kilocycles. But the navigation signal from the Howland Island beacon was transmitted at 7,500 kilocycles. This frequency was too high for her DF equipment to effectively detect. In practical terms, this meant that Amelia Earhart could not use her radio direction-finding equipment to locate Howland Island's beacon. She was flying completely on dead reckoning, calculating her position based on airspeed, wind speed, and elapsed time since departure. Dead reckoning over a distance of 2,556 miles across the open ocean, with small variations in wind speed or aircraft performance creating cumulative navigation errors, is an extremely imprecise method. A small error, just a few degrees off course, could cause the aircraft to miss a tiny island like Howland by dozens of miles. Neither Amelia nor the personnel at Howland Island apparently realized this critical limitation at the time. The lack of a proper direction-finding signal may have been a crucial factor in her inability to locate the island. In January 2024, the mystery took a surprising turn. A company called Deep Sea Vision, specializing in deep-sea exploration, announced that they had potentially located the wreckage of Amelia Earhart's aircraft on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Using advanced sonar technology, researchers identified an object at a depth of 16,000 feet, approximately 100 miles from Howland Island. The object's shape was vaguely similar to that of a Lockheed Electra. The discovery was funded by Tony Romeo, a former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer who had been obsessed with solving the Earhart mystery for years. The search area covered 5,200 square miles and cost approximately $11 million. For a brief moment, it seemed that the mystery might finally be solved. However, in November 2024, high-resolution imaging revealed that the object was not an aircraft. It was a natural rock formation, a geological feature of the ocean floor, not the remains of a missing airplane. The disappointment was palpable. The search would continue. Yet research into the Earhart mystery is far from over. The skeletal remains discovered on Nikumaroro Island in 1940 remain tantalizing evidence that awaits modern DNA analysis. Though the bones themselves are lost, photographs and measurements exist. New expeditions are being planned to the island. Researchers continue to analyze the 121 radio signals, looking for patterns and evidence. Satellite imagery is being examined for any visible traces of the aircraft or its remains. In 2024, exactly 87 years after her disappearance, the world remains fascinated by the question, what happened to Amelia Earhart? Amelia Earhart disappeared at age 39. She had not yet had the opportunity to fly around the world. She had not achieved every aviation milestone she dreamed of. In terms of years lived, her life was cut short. Yet the legacy she left behind is extraordinary. The 99s organization she founded still exists, with 153 chapters worldwide, still supporting female pilots and advancing women's participation in aviation. Thousands of women have become pilots directly because of the foundation Amelia Earhart laid. Her attitude toward marriage and independence became a blueprint for modern feminism. Her insistence on maintaining her own identity, her own career, and her own autonomy within marriage was revolutionary for 1931 and remains relevant today. Her courage in pursuing a dream that seemed impossible, in working 5 jobs to achieve her goal, and in refusing to accept the limitations that society placed on women, inspired countless others to pursue their own seemingly impossible dreams. In popular culture, Amelia Earhart became an icon, a symbol of human ambition, courage, and the desire to explore the unknown. Her disappearance, rather than diminishing her legacy, transformed her into a legendary figure. When historians list the greatest aviators of the 20th century, Amelia Earhart is invariably included. When feminists discuss women who challenged societal norms and fought for equality, Amelia Earhart is remembered. When people talk about mysteries that still capture the imagination, Amelia Earhart is mentioned first. Perhaps this is her greatest achievement. Not the record she set, but the inspiration she provided. Not the mystery of her disappearance, but the certainty of her impact. On July 2nd, 1937, Amelia Earhart transmitted the words, "We are on line 157, 337. We are running north and south." Then she vanished. 88 years later, we still don't know what happened. We have theories, we have evidence, we have clues, but we don't have answers. There is something haunting about an unsolved mystery, particularly one that involves someone as remarkable as Amelia Earhart. In our age of GPS, satellite tracking, and instant global communication, it seems almost impossible that someone could simply disappear without a trace. Yet Amelia Earhart disappeared. And despite all our technology, all our investigation, all our searching, we still don't know why. Perhaps this is fitting. Amelia Earhart was a woman who defied convention, who pushed boundaries, who did the impossible. The great unsolved mystery of her disappearance seems an appropriate final chapter for someone who spent her entire life doing things that seemed impossible. We may never know what happened on July 2nd, 1937. We may never find her aircraft. We may never conclusively answer whether she crashed into the Pacific, landed on a remote island, or met some other fate. But what we do know is this: Amelia Earhart lived a remarkable life. She proved that women could do anything. She set records. She inspired others. She challenged the status quo. And when she disappeared, she left a legacy that continues to inspire people nearly 9 decades later. The mystery of Amelia Earhart's disappearance may never be solved, but the impact of Amelia Earhart's life is undeniable. And perhaps that is enough.